if you people could hear them gaslight me back here. They're just literally. I'm a little rat, and they're putting a little piece of cheese right there, and then there's piece of string, and then they just pull that little string. Ooh, no, but he was safe. No, but he was out. No, but no one ever touched the base. Boop.
It is kind of fun.
No, it's not. Mm-hmm. It's not. All right. If this happened to the Cardinals, if this play exact happened to the Cardinals, and the Cardinals were the Mets, there would be rioting in the streets.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would be a little upset myself.
All right, let's get to it, David Stokes.
Hello, McGraw. Hello, Kelly.
We didn't invite David Stokes into our neighborhood to have him listen to our discussion. He can do that with the rest of everybody on the radio. We're here to talk about, you have a couple of interesting topics today.
Well, we talked on a week ago about the upcoming vote
as
of last week to install landlord licensing in unincorporated St. Louis County, and
surprisingly enough, it failed.
It delighted to note that it failed.
But it almost passed. When you were talking about it last week, I was thinking to myself, there's no way this thing passes. But when it failed, people were shocked. They actually thought this thing was going to pass.
That the conventional wisdom was that the supporters of it had rounded up the necessary support to get it passed, and then I think it took 4 councilmen to defeat it, and 4 councilmen realized of both parties, 2 of each party voted against it, and they just realized that this was A, completely unnecessary, and B, by making it harder for low-income people to get housing, it was actively going to hurt the people in St. Louis County that we shouldn't be hurting. We should not be making it harder for low-income people to get housing, and that's what this bill would have done. So thankfully, it was defeated. One
of the things we talked about after you left was if you're kicked out of a apartment because your son was caught stealing, right? You then had to live somewhere else. So another landlord had to then rent to you, even though the last landlord had to throw you out. Think about that for a second.
That's how absurd this bill was. It was mandating homelessness. It was mandating homelessness for people, for offenses that should be dealt with through the criminal justice system. But the penalty for selling marijuana or underage drinking is not homelessness. it's probation or spend a little shock time in jail, whatever it is. It's not kick the whole family on the street.
But the fact that it almost passed is what's you can propose anything, but the fact that it almost passed is the really scary part. All right, but it failed. Hopefully, never to be heard from again.
Hopefully, never to be heard from again. That said, unlike the state legislature where a bill is introduced, if it's defeated, the session ends and there's 7 months where you can't reintroduce it.
Right.
At the Board of Aldermen or the county council, particularly the county council, where it sort of operates year long and there's only a brief breaks here and there.
Right.
I mean, it could be brought up at any time. So I hope that the councilman who introduced it just realizes that this is not something that's going to benefit the people of St. Louis County at all, particularly the unincorporated part, and I hope it stays dead.
All right. Well, the Tax Cab Commission has nothing else to do, so they want to now regulate bike cabs.
Bike cabs, because if you get an unregulated bike cab who sticks it to you and is trying to rob you blind, they'll drive you a whole 4 blocks out of your way because they need to be protected from having to walk 4 or 5 blocks for the uninformed pedicab operator.
Wait a minute. I don't live on this block. What are you doing?
I'm not going to pay you, and I'm going to walk 3 blocks that way. The
Taxi Cab Commission they went after hansom cabs a while ago, right? They went after the horse and buggy people, right? Remember that? And now they're going after the guys on the bikes, sort of like the bike rickshaws, more or less.
They are, and I love these pedicabs. When I take my kids to the game, I've got small kids, and usually, like most small kids, I can't possibly make it through 9 innings.
Right. So
we stay for 6 innings, we leave, they're tired. So we use these pedicabs to get back to the car. We put the kids in them, the bike, and you just negotiate with them, and it's great. I'm going to such and such building, such and such lot. What do you charge? It'll be $10 or whatever. Okay.
Right.
So you sort of negotiate, and they take you there. I got 2 points to make here. A, when the with Uber and all, when the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission says things like, well, we have to do it. It's by state law. This background check, it's mandated by state law. With this pedicab, with their crackdown on people who are doing this unlicensed, there's nothing in state law requiring the Metropolitan Taxi Cab to license and regulate pedicabs, bike cabs.
Right.
They took it upon themselves to interpret the law to say they should do this. So it's just an example of they're grabbing more regulatory power than I think they're authorized. Nonetheless, they want to do it. They want to impose themselves in here. Second of all, not every aspect of economic life has to be regulated by the government. I mean, people driving you on a bike for 5 blocks do not need to be government regulated. It's absurd. And too many people have bought into this presumption that, well, right, even people who don't even like it might say, well, we need better, smarter, less regulation. But I'm here to say sometimes you don't need it at all. And I'll say the same things for online fantasy sports sites.
Oh, now you're touching the third rail.
Which I don't do and think are stupid and don't. But the idea that you would have to regulate those for some reason, but at the local level, these pedicabs, it's the same thing.
But
Not everything has to be regulated.
And the
No,
timing of it all, too,
certainly
during the playoff
And the timing is
season.
terrible.
Well,
You're right, Kelly.
the timing is terrible. One, remember there was a time when before you were allowed to host a radio show, you needed an FCC license where you had to pay $35, send your license into Washington D.C. They rubber stamped it and then sent it back. That was your license to talk on the radio. Ronald Reagan did away with that, and there's certainly this deregulation. I agree with you. There's all sorts of things we can deregulate. It makes it easier, makes it simple. But and I agree with you that this is absurd. But just for a moment on internet gambling and fantasy football gambling,
Which I'll admit, I'm sure you know far more about this than I do.
you understand that there are players with inside information who don't share that information with us on the outside, so they can very easily manipulate the data for their own benefit to the detriment of the individual who doesn't have that inside information.
And I'd say 2 things. There's probably fraud laws that cover that. I mean, if you're doing that, I think you're probably covered by insider trading, fraud, other laws out there. Second of all, to me, my reaction to this is it's just another reason not to play in this rigged game. I think I know it's a rigged game out there. Does anybody actually think that you're going to make lots of money in daily fantasy?
There are all
sports?
sorts of people who think that.
Well, it is not the government's job to protect everybody from absurd thoughts.
But
the government encourages it with the lottery.
But gambling is an addiction. So they're advertising addiction on television. You're okay with that too?
Gambling certainly is an addiction.
Yes.
I don't know how daily fantasy. If you get addicted to daily fantasy sports.
Oh, well, that's like getting addicted to cough medicine or whatever else. I mean, people get addicted. So they're selling the addiction because they're saying, hey, you know what? $1, you win big. You win, right? So they're selling the addiction. Just like that's why you can't smoke on television. That's why you can't drink on television, because they're advertising addiction. And I think that crosses the line.
Well, so I said, you know far more about this than I do.
We can agree to disagree, and we can certainly, the line of regulation, and not everything should be regulated or can be regulated or should be. But if you're sliding into second base and you break the guy's leg and you don't touch second base, by golly, you shouldn't be called I'm sorry.
See?
Sorry.
You slid it in anyway.
Sorry.
Somehow it got in there somehow.
Yes.
When can we read you? When can we see you?
A lot of information up on obviously the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission and landlord licensing and other issues at showmeinstitute.org. And also we're having an event. It's part of our lecture series with the SLU Cook Business School Wednesday evening down at St. Louis University. Free and open to the public. John Tamney from Forbes is speaking. And you can find all the information again at showmeinstitute.org.
David Stokes, have a good day.
Thanks, McGraw. Thanks, Kelly.
American